This week on the video version of the Business of Tech, Russia arrests REvil hackers related to Colonial Pipeline, the PPP program gets measured, new marketplace data points to consulting, the IRS is rolling out facial recognition, and the EU considers its own DNS system. All this and more. Hit those like and subscribe buttons, and here are this week's stories. Russian authorities say they've dismantled the ransomware group REvil and charged 8 members. In cooperation with U.S. law enforcement, around $5.6 million, $600,000 of cryptocurrency, and 20 luxury cars were seized, and 14 were arrested. 8 have been charged. The Russian FSB says they were acting at the request of U.S. authorities. They will not be extradited to the U.S. The White House confirmed that one of those arrested was responsible for the Colonial Pipeline hack. REvil was also behind the CISA attacks. At the same time, Microsoft has observed destructive malware in the systems of several government agencies in Ukraine. The victims include agencies that provide critical executive branch or emergency response functions, and the IT firm that manages websites for public and private sector clients was hit too. Ukrainian police have arrested 5 members of a ransomware affiliate coordinating with US and UK officials. This happened the day before the Russian arrests. The White House held its open source summit last week. As a discussion, the focus was on ways for the public and private sectors to secure open source. One key conclusion: the understanding that open source is not the same as corporations impacted by the May 2021 Cybersecurity Executive Order. The group discussed settling on baseline standards for security, maintenance, provenance, and testing. And it appears the FBI is looking at cybercrime in a new way. Rather than focusing on indictment and arrests, they're instead imposing costs on adversaries. This from statements by 2 FBI officials late last week. Now, why do we care? Before cybersecurity engineers celebrate, let's put this in context. The US and Russia are in negotiations over military actions at the Ukraine border, which is likely of much higher priority to President Putin than one ransomware gang. I could also speculate that REvil just got too much attention, thus being the apparent target to offer up as a gesture in the negotiations. And with cyber being used in Ukraine, there's certainly interesting timing here. It's not to say this isn't significant. With law enforcement changing their tactics, the U.S. government prioritizing the issue for national security, and foreign governments responding, this is distinctly an improvement. Axios took a look at the shortage of workers in the U.S., and reports that it's bigger than just the pandemic. Quoting them, "Millions of immigrants, older workers, and mothers are missing from the labor force. Those labor shortages create problems like supply chain woes, school closures, and skyrocketing childcare costs. And some of those issues further exacerbate the worker shortages." In a survey released by the Conference Board yesterday, U.S. CEOs say labor shortages are the top threat to their businesses this year. Data from UC Davis points to about 1 million higher educated workers aging out of the market and 3.3 million more retirees. The hope? When it gets safer to return to work, more will choose to do so. And some data around vaccine and testing requirements. Google is now requiring anyone to go into one of its offices in the U.S. to have received a negative molecular test for COVID-19. Apple is now requiring proof of the COVID-19 booster shot, and unvaccinated employees will need a negative test. This comes after a similar requirement from Meta. At the federal government level, agencies are now reporting data on vaccination levels with the requirement dates in place. Some agencies are at 100% compliance, with every agency showing improvement. Agencies are working through their medical and religious exemptions lists and are expected to have determined their plans by February 15th. Why do we care? The core takeaway is building a safe environment for employees. I think they're related and part of a larger culture discussion. Culture means something different for each business, and most Americans support vaccine mandates at work. From some December data on this, quote, residents of urban areas are broadly the most supportive of their employer imposing a vaccine mandate, followed by suburban residents and then rural, with 78% of vaccinated urban residents, 70% of suburban, and 58% of rural backing a requirement compared to 22%, 15%, and 9% of unvaccinated urban, suburban, and rural residents, respectively. Make this your competitive advantage, whatever that means for your organization. LinkedIn has released its Global Talent Trends Report. Quoting Protocol, job seekers are looking for more than just a paycheck. LinkedIn found that job seekers prioritize work-life balance, 63%, ahead of pay and benefits, 60%, or culture and colleagues, 40%. The words flexibility, well-being, and culture all appeared in LinkedIn posts more often in 2021 than in 2019, and company posts that used those terms attracted more engagement than those that didn't. Younger employees prioritize flexibility. The word flexibility appeared in 83% more job listings in 2021 versus 2019, LinkedIn found. Company posts used the term 343% more over the same time period, and those posts attracted 35% more engagement. Improving company culture is the key to retention. But where should you focus your efforts to build company culture? LinkedIn users surveyed in June had a few ideas. The most popular areas of focus were professional development opportunities, 59%, flexible work support, 48%, and mental health and wellness, 42%. 35% said they wanted to see more attention paid to training managers to lead remote and hybrid teams. Diversity and inclusion was a top priority to 26% of respondents. Indeed has their new jobs report, highlighting the job openings because they aren't where they used to be. The bottom 10 locations are the big and expensive cities that typically lead on job growth, like San Francisco and Washington, D.C. The biggest grower is Boise City, Idaho, and almost all of the top 10 have a lower cost of living than the national average. And it seems business leaders are noticing. Larry Fink, one of the most prominent investors alive, released his letter to CEOs and highlighted that companies could expect employees in 5 days a week, neglect their mental health, and keep wages low, and that's no longer the case. Of note, since 2018, he's highlighted stakeholder capitalism, the idea that public firms shouldn't simply be looking to maximize profit, but should do more for their workers and society too. This year, he specifically pushed back on the term woke, calling it, quote, it's capitalism, driven by mutually beneficial relationships between you and the employees, customers, suppliers, and communities your company relies on to prosper. Why do we care? Fink's voice is undoubtedly louder than mine, but I'll observe I've been saying the same thing. I often quip about how IT services companies overinvest time and energy in their tools and underinvest in their focus on people and process. Tools generally are about 10% of the costs of an IT services business, and labor is by far the largest. Yet to listen to providers, one might think the opposite is true. Here we have all the data on the new trends. Large organizations may be searching for talent in different cities or expanding there, or simply letting people work anywhere, leveraging that flexibility desire being expressed loud and clear. Tired of long terms of service that no one understands? Seems Congress is too, as a new bill has been introduced to force a simplification of service agreements. Called the Terms of Service Labeling, Design, and Readability Act, and yes, that's TLDR for short, it would require websites to provide a summary statement before opting in to a terms of service. In Austria, the data protection watchdog group has upheld a complaint against a website under GDPR because of the use of Google Analytics. An IP address anonymization function had not been adequately implemented, but in the review, the regulator found that IP address data was personal data due to the ability to combine it with other data to identify the user. Thus, user data was being exported to the US and violated GDPR. Why do we care? Europeans continue to lead here, but it's not hard to see how this will impact American companies too. If Google Analytics sees significant changes due to European laws, that'll matter to even the smallest companies. The other theme of any of this legislation continues to focus on the consumer, even in the US. Providers should be pretty enthusiastic about the idea of the TLDR law. However, there is a downside here, as I would expect these agreements to get more end-user scrutiny when they're more apparent, and providers will need to be ready for that. Linode, a top infrastructure as a service provider as voted by G2 and TrustRadius, has resources specifically for delivering digital experiences in the cloud with better ease and affordability while not being locked into long-term agreements and commitments. Their guide, The Golden Ratio of Price to Performance in Cloud Computing, details how alternative cloud providers and open-source tools can lower costs and ease moving to multi-cloud environments. This resource and more at linode.com/MSP Radio. The National Bureau of Economic Research has dug into where the Paycheck Protection Program money went. It turns out that it mostly did not go to paychecks. I'm pulling from the report directly. With 93% of small businesses ultimately receiving one or more loans, the PPP nearly saturated its market in just 2 months. We estimate that the program cumulatively preserved between 2 and 3 million job years of employment over 14 months at the cost of $170,000 to $575,000 per job year retained. These estimates imply that only 23 to 34% of PPP dollars went directly to workers who would otherwise have lost jobs. The balance flowed to business owners and shareholders, including creditors and suppliers of PPP receiving firms. Program incidence was highly regressive, with about 3/4 of PPP funds accruing to the top quintile of households. Why do we care? This was a very costly program and mostly went to business owners and shareholders and mostly high-income households. For every job retained, it cost between $170,000 and $257,000. Only a third even went to workers. Most went right to business owners. This program did not work as intended. It did not save jobs. It did not protect people. Instead, it took money from future generations and gave it to business owners, creditors, suppliers, and shareholders. Now that we're all working differently, what does that look like? Per research from Dialpad, a majority of professionals spend a third of the work week in meetings. Here are the specifics. 45% spend less than 4 hours a week in meetings, 37% between 4 and 12 hours, 12% are between 12 and 20 hours in meetings, 5% spend more than 20 hours a week in meetings. And Mondays are the most popular day of the week to schedule meetings. Wednesdays have the longest meetings on average. Audio-related issues are the biggest pain point for video conferencing, and 82.9% believe not all video meetings require video. Xerox researched the market too, and 64% of their respondents believe they will be stronger after the pandemic. 75% are more reliant on workflow technologies compared with their pre-pandemic setups. 88% view security software and hardware protecting business information as core to their longevity, with 75% likely to upgrade current solutions this year. More than half of respondents anticipate a flexible, hybrid workplace as the future. They also say government stimulus will be essential to ensure their full transition to a technologically driven hybrid model. Citric Research highlights how remote work is the future of work. 100% of 400 IT and security leaders surveyed have adopted the hybrid work model and rank it enabling as job number one for their organizations. WeWork is also interested in the hybrid workspace. They've launched software called Workplace by WeWork, specifically to let companies manage their workplaces online. This was internal software that the company is now making available to others. Why do we care? Workflow should include meetings, and if you think about the usage of the technology, one would think reducing that load of meetings would be a pretty significant area of opportunity. While the move to so-called hybrid is obvious, it's no wonder WeWork is offering software there. And remember, whatever platform one selects, it's the services revenue around implementing it and making it effective that is of genuine interest and why we care about this entire space. Microsoft has rolled out a series of new laptops with OEM partners. Windows 11 SE is designed to take on Chromebooks in education and is optimized for Microsoft Edge, Office, and Microsoft's cloud-based services. Third-party apps like Zoom and Chrome can be installed via a selection of authorized apps. Gartner has new data on the size of the IT market. The analyst says that for 2020, IT spending should exceed pre-pandemic levels by growing 5.1% this year, reaching $4.5 trillion. Enterprise software, including cloud, will increase the most at 11% year-over-year growth. The IT services segment, which includes consulting and management services, is expected to have the second highest spending growth in 2022, reaching $1.3 trillion, up 7.9% from 2021. One of those services is cloud migrations from legacy IT, which a study by Achieve 360 highlights as having significant barriers around data regulation, security, and uncertain costs. The report found that only 35% of organizations store more than 50% of their legacy app data on cloud services. Yet, more than 80% say their priority is to move their data within 12 months or sooner. 60% said data compliance was a big concern with changing data regulations in California and Europe. Security is a huge concern for 55%, especially with the rise in ransomware and the hefty fines if hackers gain access to data. And about 50% said they had uncertainty over budgets for cloud-based IT, plus there's a significant lack of IT talent in the area. Why do we care? All the problems highlighted today continue to be the hard ones. Pick any one of these areas and it's a sea of problems to solve and revenue to generate. Rather than pick any one, I'll observe that consulting should be coming back into vogue. Your real value is in being that consultant, far more than keeping the lights on. Don't devalue the consultancy. The World Economic Forum's new Global Cybersecurity Outlook 2022 report highlights the gap between the business suite and information security one around a company's cyber resilience. Quoting ZDNet, 92% of business executives surveyed agreed that cyber resilience is integrated into enterprise risk management strategies, or in other words, protecting the organization against falling victim to a cyber attack or mitigating the incident so it doesn't result in significant disruption. Only 55% of security-focused executives believe cyber resilience is integrated into those risk management strategies, indicating a substantial shift in cybersecurity attitudes. Why? The cyber teams feel they are often not consulted. CISA is warning about the recent incidents in Ukraine, advising alertness, and has issued an advisory. This is aimed at all U.S. organizations, and these are data wiping attacks. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre has published guidelines for organizations to use with customers regarding SMS and phone calls. There are also warnings of a new ransomware family called white Rabbit, now seen in the wild and is possibly a side operation of the Fin8 hacking group. It's tiny and lightweight, includes double extortion, and threatens to leak data if the ransom isn't paid. Some research from Bitwarden points to technologists as part of the problem for security policies. The data shows that 53% of IT decision makers shared passwords via email, significantly increasing from 39% just a year earlier. Almost half, at 44%, of the InfoSec pros in that survey said security rules and policies aren't worth the hassle. Microsoft updated their patches that broke systems last week. Some Windows Server 2012 systems went into a boot loop, others had broken Windows VPN clients, and another group had hard drives become unusable. An out-of-band fix is now available. Cybercriminals are also taking advantage of log4shell vulnerabilities in SolarWinds ServU and Zycel devices. Vulnerabilities in general remain widespread in healthcare. Half of the internet-connected devices in hospitals are vulnerable to attack. The infusion pump is the most common one, with 73% of devices having a vulnerability. This is from a report by cybersecurity company Cernio. Finally, some Microsoft and CrowdStrike research highlights the motivation of ransomware hackers. It's not all about the money. Sometimes it's about disrupting enemies, embarrassing victims, data theft, as well as intelligence and military use. Why do we care? This again feels like the tactical updates required to deliver IT these days. Starting this summer, users with an irs.gov account will no longer be able to log in with just a username and password. The system will require providing a government identification document, a selfie, and copies of their bills to access the IRS system, including filing taxes and making payments online. The IRS is rolling out facial recognition, although the agency is quick to note it is comparing two images and not scanning large data collections. The company behind the system, ID.me, refers to it as face match rather than other facial recognition systems. Why do we care? This is a system that a significant portion of Americans will use and interact with. Will it make citizens and thus users more comfortable with facial recognition? Will they push back? Will regulators get involved? With some localities banning the systems entirely, a federal rollout like this will be impactful. It's coming this summer. A notable proposal in the EU, building their own DNS service, which will include filtering capabilities. It'll be made available to EU institutions and the general public for free. The service, named DNS for EU, is in the project planning phase. Officials say this is in response to consolidation in the DNS market around non-EU operators. Filtering would be built using intelligence feeds, such as the ones from national CERT teams. Why do we care? Europe continues to lead on several initiatives, particularly around privacy. Europeans get a lot more of the downside of tech, particularly big tech, without the upside of the impact to the economy like Americans do. This validates two trends. First, the splintering of the internet into segments. Second, the internet is increasingly viewed as a utility, the way roads and electricity are. One more step in that direction. Finally, European providers may want to be aware that this is in the works. It will directly impact IT service companies' offerings. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the Daily Podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.